This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 44. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 8th of August 2006. Last week I announced that we would be looking at intercultural projects with a trip to project management in Japan, but I had to reschedule. The Japan interview is now planned for next week. But today's topic is no less interesting, trust me. We'll be looking at the question whether you should be using Agile or plan-driven project management methodologies on your project. But before we do that, the usual set of announcements. And I would once again like to welcome all new listeners who have found us through the article written by Lois Mentrop in the August edition of PM Network titled Social Network. And I'm very glad that the Project Management Podcast has received coverage in that worldwide magazine. Welcome to all you out there. And also a big welcome to all new listeners who have found us through the PM Connection newsletter. That is a free newsletter with excellent project management information. And we, the Project Management Podcast, we were the sponsor of the August edition of that newsletter. If you're looking for PM Connection, check it out in the pmpodcast.com in the left-hand menu. Click on Affiliations and you will find the PM Connection banner in there. And while you're on the website, don't forget to check out the new things. I think I mentioned those before. First of all, I now have images of my interview guests. So if you want to look at the face behind the voice of today, for instance, go to the website and you will see a little image right there. And on the right-hand side of every page on the website, there are now 3 polls. And I would really appreciate it if you would take, 5 seconds to click on a button and say whether or not, and that's the first poll, you like the new website. Or the second poll, if you could tell me how long you think a podcast should last. Should it be 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or does it matter if the topic is interesting to you? And the third one is the question whether or not long interviews should be broken up into 2 episodes. I've had a long interview in episode 42 and 43 and I broke it up. And I have another long interview already recorded and I'd like to know from you. Would you like to get the full 1-hour interview or would you prefer getting it in 2 30-minute bits? So please take a moment and vote on these polls for me. Today's episode is sponsored by BOT International, the provider of processes on demand. Once you have determined the SDLC methodology best for your organization, making it usable and keeping it updated can be the difference between long-lasting value and short-lived gains. BOT's Processes on Demand solves this problem, providing customizable PMO processes, policies, and dashboards, including features for customization and administration. To learn more, please visit www.botinternational.com. As always with our sponsors, if you want to visit them, the easiest way and best way for us personally is please click on their banner that is displayed on the pmpodcast.com, because if you click on our banner, that way the sponsor knows that you have actually found them through us.
Hi Cornelius, my name is Gleesh Warriors. I'm calling from New Jersey in the US. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your podcast. It's a great podcast, very well structured, and I think it's full of useful information. And I think it's one of the best podcasts, not just in project management, but in general in looking at all the other podcasts too. So thank you very much for that and all the good information you've been providing every week. That would be my feedback. In terms of clarification I had, in project management, documentation is such an integral part in any project. And one of the challenges I'm facing is how do you get through a proper documentation review process when there is deliverables, when there is documentation deliverables. There are various methodologies I know where you can actually send it out for review and then it goes out. But I'm just wondering if you had anything in mind, or if you could point out any good information on that, and your thoughts on how important documentation is as part of project management. Thank you.
All right, so I think the gentleman whose voice you've just heard, his name was Keith, and if I understood you correctly, then I think your question was, how do I ensure that documents on my project are timely, accurate, reviewed, and how do you know that you have the right version? Well, it all starts really with document control, so that you can ensure that the right people have the right copy of the right document. There are, of course, many ways of doing that, and the most basic way is, of course, just slapping a version number on it. And this is really where my first resource here is leading us. And both resources are actually taking us down under, because both resources I found in the general Australian area. The first one comes to us from the Tasmanian government and their project management department. They have a fact sheet on document control, and this document is 6 pages long, and it gives you the basics of how to keep control of your documents in a project. And this framework that they lay out, it can be used both with or without an electronic document management system. And that, of course, takes us right into the next level here. What you really want in order to keep control of your documents is, of course, some form of a document management system. You want a central repository so that you can ensure that your documents are always up to date. You don't want to send them out via email like you suggested in your question. You always want to make sure that the users come to you, to your central repository. And by central repository and document management system, I don't mean just your network drive where you store the latest versions of your documents, albeit that's a way you can control it nicely, but it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking an actual system that allows you to check documents in, check documents back out, and allows also for automatic versioning. Many of you may have heard of SharePoint, which is a Microsoft tool that enables you to do that. It's rather inexpensive. And then some may have heard of the Mirant Version Manager, also known as PVCS. Those are kind of tools that are focusing particularly on document management and document control space. Many of today's project management tools have such features integrated already as part of the toolset that they come with. And the tool from Down Under that I have found is called QDMS. It is a suite of tools that, amongst others, offers project collaboration and, of course, project control mechanisms, document control mechanisms for drawings and other types of documents. And, of course, this is just one of hundreds of tools out there that have a project management focus and give you also the opportunity to do that. Yeah, but then how do you actually get people to review these documents and bring them up to date, making sure that their quality is up to what they're supposed to be? Well, I can't really help you there. That is pretty much a question of the available time of each of your resource and very much a question of the corporate culture. Two examples here for you. In my own company, the approach is rather lax. People don't really review the documents. You never really know if it's up to date or not. In my wife's company, however, document control, reviewing the documents, is second nature to everyone. It is part of the culture, and you can be sure if they open up a document in their document management system, it is the latest and greatest version. Which, by the way, reminds me of something completely different. Remember last week we talked about the Quality 101 podcast that I suggested that you listen to by Paul Palms? Well, Paul talked about something similar. And he said, if you want to make sure that users always come back to your central repository, put in the footer of each and every document something towards the end of the following sentence. This document is obsolete when printed. Well, that means, of course, that if you get a paper copy of this document, it's out of date. It's not the latest version anymore. Only the version which is online in your document management system is the latest version. So, we've combined two things today together, my answer to a listener question, as well as a couple of helpful resources for you. Yes, and if you're looking for these two helpful resources, as always, go to thepmpodcast.com. Either click on the helpful resources on the left-hand navigation side, or in today's episode number, where are we at? 44, I believe, right? You will find helpful resources for this episode, a link at the bottom of the show notes. And now, let us move on to the main section of the show, the interview with Craig Wilson about whether or not you should be using Agile methodologies on your project, or whether you should be using plan-driven methodologies. Now, Craig D. Wilson is an independent information technology management consultant, and he is assisting organizations in more effectively managing people, projects, and processes. Before he established his consulting practice, he spent more than a dozen years at senior and executive level IT management position in a broad variety of industries, including banking, entertainment, healthcare, and also in relocation services. As a consultant, he has also served in the insurance and financial services industry. So he's pretty much seen a pretty wide spectrum here of industries. Over his career, Craig has also been responsible for hundreds of project managing teams that range in size from about half a dozen members to well over 100. These projects have involved custom software development, commercial package integration, infrastructure design and deployment, data telecommunications, operations, and production services. So, here's the interview.
Project Management Podcasts Feature Interview. Today with Craig Wilson, IT Management Consultant.
Hello, Craig, and welcome to the program.
Morning, Cornelius. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to your home here today. We want to talk in the interview about the best approach on how to select between an agile methodology and a plan-driven methodology. But before we get into that, could you give us a short overview of what distinguishes these two general methodologies?
All right, well, first let me start about what a methodology is, because I think many of your listeners are project managers. And while the project management discipline basically tells you how to structure a project such that who does what and when do they do it. System development methodology is more focused on the how do you do it. So what is it people are doing and how do they do it in order to develop a system. The methodologies tend to fall into a spectrum from the plan-driven methodologies to the more agile methodologies. The plan-driven methodologies are the ones that we tend to think of as more the legacy applications, the legacy methodologies from the 60s and 70s and 80s, things like SDM 70. The rational unified process is often referred to as a plan-driven process, although it can also be agile, I should point out. The agile methodologies come in the flavors like extreme programming, Scrum, lean software development.
Let me take you back to the very first project that you ever managed. What methodology did it follow?
I think the first project was seat of your pants methodology.
Like everyone else,
and use that for a while. So that was the first one. I was trained very early on in something called the Jackson Design Methodology, which came out of England, I think, from the 70s or 80s, with a proponent of that, one of the professors at UCLA. And I took that class before I ever had my first job in IT. So I thought everybody followed a process. And when I got my first job and said, well, okay, what process do you use? How do we implement it? The people looked at me like, what? You just attack the project and get it done and tell us when you're finished. We'll give you another.
I think you can go to many companies today and you'll still
find that same thing.
Issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What was it like for you then to go from knowing these plan-driven methodologies and then learning Agile methodologies?
I think the feeling for me was that of a light going on, a general epiphany. I had been trained in, as I mentioned, the Jackson Design Methodology. I had been trained in a methodology from one of the big 5 consulting firms, and it attacked projects that way. About 10 years ago, I took a class on the Rational Unified Process and realized that there had been a whole discipline that I had been missing that was necessary for the effective development of software, and really got interested in it at that time. Started studying everything I could and was introduced to Agile methodologies at basically the same time, because the Rational Unified Process does follow the spectrum from Agile to plan-driven. But then I started hearing about things like the extreme programming, Scrum, and others in the Agile camp, and picking up more information from there as well.
As you started learning more and more about Agile, was there anything that you had maybe problems with or that required a real shift in your mindset, going from plan-driven to now being more Agile?
I don't think it was that shocking, because I don't see plan-driven and Agile perhaps as black and white as many people see it. I think there's a spectrum between the two with many, many shades of gray. And I think the only people that really use it at the extremes are the authors of books and articles.
Yeah, right. I was just going to go about that, because today it looks like it's like a religion. Agile is the best thing that has ever been brought to software development, and you should never use plan-driven again. I mean, you look at articles written in magazines today, that's what they come up with. So you don't subscribe to that?
Absolutely not. I think, again, it's the right tool for the right job, what you're being faced with. And there's a lot of factors that lead to that decision as to which approach that you would take.
Yeah. Are you comfortable in either approach? Is it like second nature to you?
I won't go that far, as I can still consider myself a student of methodologies. But what I will say is this: in the people that I have seen executing Agile methodologies, the people who are best at it are the people who were already good at plan-driven methodologies. So what I pick up from that is that people who have the discipline to execute processes and tools and techniques that lead to a methodology can do either one.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's discipline. And for whether you're doing a plan-driven methodology or an Agile methodology, it still comes down to the discipline in the processes and techniques that you use. And one of the analogies that I like to use is a military operation. If you're planning a division strength landing or multiple division strength landing on Normandy in World War II, you're using a plan-driven approach. It's months or even years in the planning. The number of people and units and divisions that you have to coordinate with is phenomenal. And that takes a lot of coordination, a lot of communication, a lot of planning. On the other hand, having a black ops execution that you're doing behind enemy lines with a handful of people moving across a number of targets, and they may have to do targets of opportunity, is much more adaptive in how they execute. However, the discipline and training is still extreme for both of those. One of the mistakes that I see, I think, with Agile, or people that say that they're executing Agile, is what I hear from them is, we were incapable of executing a plan-driven approach. We don't have the discipline to do that, so we're going to be Agile. Well, that always concerns me because Agile takes just as much discipline, in fact, maybe more so on the part of the individual team members as a plan-driven. In fact, one of the factors that I would consider when trying to choose between a more plan-driven approach, or a Agile approach, is the process maturity of the team members. How well they understand their part in the team, how well they understand how their deliverables are consumed and used by the rest of the team, how well they interact with the rest of the team, is a big factor in my choosing which approach to go with.
Well, that's an excellent segue, because the reason that we're doing the interview today is you wrote an article in the PMIOC's Milestones monthly newsletter titled Plan-Driven versus Agile. And in this article, you have, I think it was 7 such factors, the process maturity of the project team being one of them. Let's stick with that. How do you measure the process maturity of your project team?
I think I start off with, when I'm interviewing the individual team members for the proposed project, just getting a feeling from them what they see as their responsibility in the project, their approach, how well they understand their discipline. I'm amazed at the number of people that I deal with that have only the vaguest idea of what their responsibility is on the project. They've got their title, they know that they've got a deliverable, but how that plays with everything else and how it connects to all the other deliverables, they many times just have the vaguest idea. For example, some of the analysts that I deal with, I just write down a checklist of the things that need to happen and I hand that off to somebody and I'm finished with my job. So they don't really understand how it's being used. And without that understanding of the process from end to end, I think it's difficult for people to contribute fully and effectively what they need to do for their parts of a project.
Do you consider the process maturity of the team to be the number one factor of all of the ones that you've listed?
I would say it's definitely in the top of them. Some of the other factors that I would consider is not only the process maturity of the individuals, but how often they've worked together in the past, how well they know each other. I think the number of people that are going to be on the team is a big factor. If I've got a short project that's going to be 4, 6, 8 weeks in duration, and I've got a team of half a dozen people, I'm going to tend to want to do more of an Agile approach. On the other hand, if I have a project that's going to be 6, 12, or 18 months, and I've got dozens or scores or maybe even hundreds of people involved, I'm going to do a more plan-driven approach, simply because of the complexity of the communications.
So project size also a major factor then?
Absolutely. On the other hand, again, there's a whole lot of on the other hands with describing plan-driven and Agile. On the other hand, while I would want to take a plan-driven approach for the overall project, what I might do is break it into smaller sub-deliverables and have a more Agile approach there. Mm-hmm. So what would be the difference? On the plan-driven approach, it's going to be a more formal approach. It's going to be schedule and plan-driven. There will be artifacts and key deliverables and gateway decision points in the project. The Agile is going to be a little more adaptive. What I would look for in that is, again, small subgroups of people. Again, preferably somewhere 4, 6, 8 at the outside, preferably co-located with ready access to the subject matter experts. In fact, many of the Agile methodologies ask that the subject matter expert be co-located in the same room as the people doing the actual system development. Then you get into the whole joint application development and that sort of thing, possibilities when you have someone co-located.
What about the complexity of the issues at hand?
I think the more complex the issue, the more discussion that has to go on the more revisiting items, the more research that has to be done, may tend to lend itself more to a plan-driven approach. On the other hand, if it's very complex and it's the first time the problem's been looked at, you may be approaching it more as an R&D type effort. That would tend to lend itself more to Agile. So you can move back and forth in a project. You may initiate a project very Agile as you do the initial feasibility studies. You're gathering you're doing the market research. You're having round the table discussions, that sort of thing. Once you've kind of positioned the project and figured out what it is, you may decide, or the demand maybe of the project, that you must have a much larger team, perhaps with people that don't have the process maturity of the first initial sub-team that you started with, and you may have to have more formal processes in place, and so you may move more to a plan-driven at that point.
Pretty much what you're telling me is these methodologies live side by side, hand in hand. You can have an overarching plan-driven methodology which is supported by sub-projects that you run as agile methodologies or as agile-driven projects. And at the same time, you can have an agile project which you're then going to morph into a plan-driven and back to agile as it is required.
As it's required,
yeah.
Yes. I don't see a problem with that. Again, the ability to do that, I think, would depend again on the process maturity of the team. And if your team, especially if your team moves in size, you start off with maybe a small core that you start the project off, people that have worked together a long time, people that are very senior level, people that are very knowledgeable in their domain areas, very agile approach. Then as you spread out, again, all the different communication links that you have to have, you can implement a more plan-driven, more formal-driven approach.
Who makes the decision? Who decides that we're going agile or plan-driven?
I think there's a couple factors in that. I think that management, of course, has a big part in making that decision. I think the project manager has a huge part in making that decision. But it also depends on the structure of the team. In the more weak matrix type project management structures, the project manager may not have the authority or the ability to do that. Where you have the more projectized organization, the project manager can dictate it. But what you have to be careful of is that you have buy-in from the team and that they understand it. If you just go from agile to plan-driven without explaining what you're doing and why you're doing it, you're going to confuse the bejesus out of your team.
That means organizational culture is also a factor.
Organizational culture is a big factor. Management experience is a big factor. Another factor is the glamour factor that you've got to be careful of. And the glamour factor is, now that everybody's talking about Agile, everyone wants to jump on that bandwagon. And there's times that it makes sense and times that it doesn't. And if you're on a project and the very first thing that the management team says is, we're going to throw away all the things we used to do because we're going to do Agile, that is a red flag going up because their expectation levels are probably going to be out of sight.
Now, all of these factors that you've just talked about, I don't think, prior to reading your article, that I have seen anything along those lines, taking sort of the middle road. Do you know of any other articles, websites, or books out there that talk about specifically this, how to select between the two?
I don't. It doesn't mean that they're not out there, but I'm not aware of them. Most of the products I see, people may have an axe to grind or a pot to boil, as it were, and they're gonna push one or the other. Also, the more time that I spend on it, talking with colleagues that are much more knowledgeable about this than I am, the more I'm realizing that there are very many shades of gray. There's not extremes in this. Very few people that are experienced attempt to follow one of these methodologies exactly the way it is in the book. I have seen people, for example, in an attempt to do a plan-driven methodology, and they may not refer to it to that, but a robust methodology, say we're going to follow the rational unified process. And they buy the book, and they buy all the products, And they say, this is it. We have to follow every single step. And they get halfway through their first project and they throw up their hands and say, this is absolutely unworkable. Or on the other extreme, they say, we're going to follow an agile methodology. And so we don't have to do anything. We just start coding. I get a lot of people tell me that they're using, for example, extreme programming. And to use extreme programming, you have to follow, I think it's 17 or 18 different principles and practices according to the extreme programming. Originally had, I think, 12 key factors, and that's changed now to 20 as of 2005.
Wow.
But one of the principal approaches that you're supposed to have in extreme programming is pair programming. And so when people tell me we're using extreme programming, the first question I ask them is, how does that pair programming work out? Because I've never used it. How effective is it?
And just to explain, pair programming means that two developers work on the same workstation on the same problem at the same time, so that they develop one piece of code together.
Yes. And I've never found a CFO that was willing to pay for that expense. But I've asked several people that. And I think in all the years I've asked that, I've only found one person that answered that they did pair programming. So I said, okay, well, what about the testing? Because in extreme programming, you're supposed to write the unit tests before you write the application code. And the answer I usually get is, well, we don't do that. So, well, what is it that you do? Well, the minute we get the project, we start coding. And then we figure it out from there. And that's not a process, that's chaos.
Yes, like in so many companies today.
Unfortunately, it's still that way in many companies, yes.
What is the biggest mistake that I can make if I have to make the decision between Agile versus plan-driven?
I think the biggest mistake in choosing between the two would be making the decision without making certain that the team is willing and capable of executing one of those processes. Mm-hmm. Now, something that I've observed is that the people that I know that are very good at executing agile methodologies were people that were already good at executing plan-driven methodologies.
Yes.
These were people that have a lot of experience, a lot of discipline, and they can move from one to the other and understand what the factors are that are necessary and where the pitfalls are to watch out for.
So you're more or less telling me it doesn't matter which one you choose. You can choose, let's say, the wrong one, as long as you have someone at the head who knows what they're doing and you have the buy-in from the team. Even the wrong methodology will get you to your goal.
I think either methodology will get you there. I think it's a question of which gets you there the most effectively and with the least amount of pain. One of the concerns, I keep saying one of it, there's a myriad of things here, but in some cases, I have managers tell me they want to follow an agile approach because they were unable to follow a plan-driven approach. And that's a red flag for me immediately. If they couldn't follow a plan-driven approach, I think they're going to have a very difficult time with Agile. In many ways, to be effective at Agile, I think you need to be, the individual team members need to be more process mature and more capable of communicating with their co-team members than you do in a plan-driven approach. I use a plan-driven approach to buffer up a weak team, a team that's weak in methodology, that's weak in process, that's weak in execution. I'll go to the plan-driven approach. If I'm working with very senior level people with a lot of experience and teams that have worked together before, I go Agile.
Now, all that said, your current project that you're working on, Agile or plan-driven?
Current project is very Agile.
Very Agile. How did you make that decision? Or did you make that decision?
Actually, I did not make the decision because I got brought into the project after it was underway. It's a very small team. We're bringing a product to market. There's a lot of competition from other people in the marketplace. We think we're bringing out a better product, but there's a lot of pressure to do it quickly. The people are extremely knowledgeable in the technologies that are being used. And have worked together on many, many other projects before.
So high process maturity.
very high process maturity, although there's been some pitfalls too. One of the things that was observed when I first came on board was that while the team has been working, they've developed a prototype. We're now working on the production product. Many decisions that were made early on had to be revisited because they were never documented. And so decisions that were made, by a handful of people sitting around a room, suddenly, days or weeks later, wait a minute, what was the decision again? And they had to go back and revisit it. So just because it's Agile does not mean that there's no documentation. It does not mean that there's not effort put into modeling and that sort of thing. It's just that the emphasis is on the code rather than on the deliverables and gateway points.
Do you personally prefer one methodology over the other?
I prefer the methodology that's going to make the project easiest for me to execute.
Yeah. Now, in conclusion, do you think that these skirmishes that we currently see between Agile proponents and plan-driven proponents, that they're going to go away and that they're finding that they will find more of the middle ground like you and I are following right here, or is it just something that's going to go on forever?
Well, I think it'll go on. It reminds me of all the religious arguments we have about the different programming languages. But I think the discussion is very important because it keeps us in the industry, keeps us honest, keeps us looking at ways to improve. What are the downsides to the approach we have? What can we do better? And we learn that in these arguments. We can, if we're willing to listen to the other person and their perspective, we'll pick up things that will be helpful to us.
Great. Thank you very much for the discussion about Agile here. Now, are you ready to move on to my final 10 questions, the 10 standard questions that I ask everyone at the end of an interview?
I'll take a shot at it.
All right. Number 1, what was your favorite project?
My favorite project is always the current one because I'm always thinking, gee, this one, I'm going to get it. I'm going to do it hopefully I'll do it a little better and learn a little bit more.
Number 2, what project would you like to have managed?
What project would I like to have managed? I don't know. I always think that the Apollo Moon program would have been exciting, but I think it would have probably put me in the grave.
Number 3, what is your favorite project management book?
My favorite project management book. I would have to say that my favorite project management book is 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. Many people know him more as Lawrence of Arabia. And what I find interesting there is if you look at it from the perspective of a project manager, here was somebody who came in with a goal of achieving a military victory. He had no formal authority. He had to work with team members who not only were antagonistic towards each other, but attempted to literally kill each other. He had cultural implications to overcome, personal items to overcome, and with all that, he was still successful. But I find that when I see what T.E. Lawrence did, I hope that someday that I could be as successful a project manager as he was.
Number 4. What is the topic of the next seminar that you're planning to attend?
The topic of the next seminar I'm planning to attend? I'm not sure. I don't have anything planned at the moment. I can tell you the next seminar the next program I'm planning to attend. I'm going to be going to the Southern California Coalition Technology Conference.
Oh yes, and you'll be talking about the topic that we talked about today, right?
I'll actually be speaking at one of the sessions, yes. But I'm hoping to listen to some of the other speakers there as well.
What is the best way to make a project fail?
The same way to make it succeed. Don't start it in the first place. I think trying to force something that the team is not comfortable with is probably.
Number 6. How do you like to celebrate a successful project?
I usually take the team out for drinks after work. I find that single malt scotch is a great way to go. But that's also the way to get it motivated in the middle of the project too, when things get tough.
Well, you may choose to give the same answer to the next question. Number 7, in your projects, where do you focus most of your attention in order to be successful?
I focus most of my attention on the people and getting them to communicate and participate with the rest of the team.
Number 8. If you weren't a project manager, what would you like to be?
Retired?
Number 9. What is the one thing that a project manager cannot live without?
Oh, that's easy. Espresso.
And finally, number 10, the oldest question in project management. What is more important in a project manager? Project management expertise or industry expertise?
I saw that question ahead of time, and I've been thinking about it, and I'm not sure that I have an answer. I've struggled with that myself. I guess the answer that I would give is this, is that I've spent 25 years doing in the IT field, and much of it doing project management. And I feel that I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to understand project management in IT. I don't think that I would feel comfortable in going into another industry and attempting to that. I don't think I would feel comfortable going into construction or something. So maybe it's more the area of discipline. In my case, software development.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Craig, for welcoming me in your home today and for giving me your time on the program today.
It was my privilege. Thank you, Cornelius.
And that was Craig Wilson talking to me about whether you should be using Agile methodologies or plan-driven methodologies on your project. And the answer, as always, is it depends. Well, yeah, and let me remind you again that you can find the link to the book which Craig and also all other interview guests recommended in the helpful resources under the books category. Your purchases, by the way, through Amazon help us to cover the cost of the program that you're listening to. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. Tune in again next week when, if all goes well, we will finally be talking about project management in Japan through the eyes of a project manager from Germany who now lives in the United States of America. As always, you can find us on the web at thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. Also, when you stop by at thepmpodcast.com, please don't forget to click on the link labeled PM Templates to increase your productivity and check out the great PM templates that are offered. And finally, we have this. Today, we are looking at the top 10 things a project manager should never say to a customer, and this is thanks to projectsmart.co.uk. Number 10. If you're as confused as I am, then you know as much as I do. Number 9. Don't worry, it's easier than it looks. And number 8. I'm not sure what happened. It worked last time. Number 7. Implementation? Oh, we'll worry about that when we get to it. Number 6. The problem is we have too much work for too few people. Number 5. My last project was a complete disaster. Number 4. We can deliver much earlier than you're asking for. Number 3. We'll definitely come in under budget. Number 2. Are you stupid or what? Number 1. Nothing can go wrong. I promise. With that, learn to negotiate for scarce resources in your company. You know, there's always that one specialist in a company that everyone always needs on every project. If you learn to negotiate well, if you give both to this resource and his or her manager what they want, you will be more successful in securing that resource and you will be able to drive your project much, much faster forward. Until next time.